Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 7th and last day of Oslo International Acting Festival. Nice to see you. It's going to be a long day, and we're going to end up in Dramatikkens Hus on a big party there. And I hope everyone will come, because we're also going to show the work of the dramatic writers that have participated in our workshops during the week. So, show and discuss, actually. Yeah, with both the dramatic writers, but also maybe probably going to ask some questions for the different workshop holders. And welcome to you, Karmenlara.
Thank you.
Which we're going to have a talk to today. And as always, I want to make a short introduction, if you're okay.
Yes, please do.
Karmenlara is the head of the acting study at Norwegian Theatre Academy in Fredrikstad. She comes from New York and has worked with what I think we can call as a multidisciplinary performer. Working with dance, theatre, costume, space, and probably also exploring the relationship between them. She also has a pedagogical background as a teacher from Tisch School of Art. And also been a part of Spider Woman Theatre, originally a Native American theatre. Her workshop in this festival is called Withdrawal of the Technique, or Acting as an Artistic Research. The headline, of course, maybe suggests a critical approach to the idea of the hermetic method for learning acting. But I just, initially, before we start this talk, I want to just remind us that there already exist thoughts that somehow are starting to be a tradition. In this context, I want to mention a few books, as I normally try to do this morning, to recommend you to read. First, I want to mention the book, I don't know her last name pronounced, I never heard it pronounced, but Eleanor Fuchs, The Death of the Character, which is written in 1996. It's about the problem of the character in today's theatre. She claims that we can't continue to talk about the character like we used to do. It doesn't mirror neither the theatre or the audience of today. She suggests that character is something that happens in the space between the performer and the audience, not in the performer or the performance in itself. I also just want to mention Nicolas Bureau, the writer of Relational Art, published in 1998, I think, that emphasize that the most important thing in art and theatre is the dialogue between the performer and the audience, or between the performances and the audiences, and so on, and the complexity of it. Starting to talk about it from the perspective of mostly happenings. That book is also translated to Norwegian. The title is Relasjonell estetikk, I think. Published on Pax a couple of years ago. I don't want to mention this because I forcingly want to put you in a box with them. I just want to mention it again, just to make us aware that there already is quite a big and well-articulated unrest, I would say, about the modern, but also about the postmodern theatre understanding. A search for a new way to understand what we're doing in the theatre today. This new perspective is created maybe because theatre comes up with new forms and that needs to be explained and researched and figured out, but maybe also because our perception of reality changes over time, our communication changes over time, so do also our understanding of human nature, probably. So this, of course, also creates a new form. So, first of all, I just want to ask you, before we start to talk about Fredrikstad, what you do there, and your approach to this training and what you're doing in the workshop and so on. I just want to ask you, what is your influence in your own training? Where have you kind of picked up your impulses from in your practical life as a performer and so on?
Thank you for that very intelligent introduction. And also, yes, it's really important to acknowledge that I'm here to represent, in a way, traditions of questioning. I've inserted myself in a way into the dialogue from that space. It's not like I invented this perspective or perspectives, so it's important to contextualize it. So within that, I would say, experientially, what's been most influential for me as a performer and as a thinker is the breakdown that happens when we try to do what we think we should do with what we know. So as a dancer, for example, in my dance training, I found the spaces of falling really interesting. As a young person, 18 years old, trying to study contemporary dance and do it right, and to create the body that can do it right through the right exercises, but that the body that actually expressed my relation to the world and my experience of other people was the body that couldn't do that, the body that kept breaking down. And in a way, the structures that emerged, right, the structures of expression that emerged through those breakdowns. And I think that's a creative process actually for many artists. So I would say, let's begin with the idea of failure and the idea of breakdown as important space or influential information. And of course, I think in this context where we have a lot of what I would call elders presenting their history and their experience and techniques, elders have been really important in my experience as an artist and in my education. And I don't just mean from the Native American community or from performance in that space, but those teachers that I've had in the different areas where I've worked as an artist or as a professional. When I worked in the Caribbean, I worked with a lot of men who, actually men, old men, in their 80s, who were carnival performers. And during that time, I was studying some characters and festival performance in that genre. And I kind of ended up there by accident, but I became curious about this carnival in Trinidad because there were these situations that were set up on the street, partly through costume, and partly through rhythm, and partly through something like a character, but it really shifted from moment to moment. And those relationships were set up in order to create the possibility of a fight that would generate different kinds of dances and ways of relating in space, or different forms of speech, some of which were invented on the spot, right? Like, for example, a kind of gibberish. Literally, they describe as gibberish. And so some of these old men that I spent time with, actually, part of what they would talk about is the slippage. They wouldn't use the word slippage, but they would talk about, oh, I do it this way because, you know, I have to deal with him in the street at this moment, and sort of, that's what's interesting. And the other guy would say, no, that's not how you do it. That's not how you do this character, was the word they would use. That's not how you do this character. And the funny thing was, of course, many of the traditions I was looking at were this Black Indians, what they were called. And any of you guys who've looked at New Orleans Carnival, you might know these characters. And what was curious for me is people were trying to, in the Caribbean, were trying to perform Indians, people from African backgrounds, people from East Indian, sort of Madrasi backgrounds, were masking in a way as Indians, American Indians, and trying to find ways of relating sort of to each other in that space, which is totally a fantasy space because it wasn't based on research of a culture. And I thought, this is really problematic, and coming from having a mixed background, which was Native American, I thought, what does it mean to play Indian and look Indian and be Indian in public space? So part of it was learning from these men how they struggled with the fantasy with that as a performance practice. And I didn't really theorize about it much then, but it influenced the questions I had about, well, what is a stage? What is an identity? What is the right way to do something? And I would also add to that moving out of the Caribbean, that working as a scholar, some of my most influential teachers have been those who I consider elders. And one is a woman named Elizabeth Youngbrule. Elizabeth Youngblood was Hannah Arendt's protege and biographer. And she passed away actually this year, but she was an incredible influence on me. And what I learned a lot from working with her was to understand that the space of relation is a space where cultural knowledge develops. And that's a space of risk. And I have to put myself sort of in your care to find out who I am. So I can't actually bring a technique of me to the situation and say, well, I want this from you, so I say I want to seduce you, right? So how do I act in order to do that? Well, I can think of all these different ways in social space that will get that result, but what's actually happening is the breakdown, right, of all those expectations, right? And the space in between is where something very interesting, potentially very dangerous happens, and maybe that's actually what seduction is, rather than the success of all of the behaviors. So one of the things I learned from Elizabeth was that in order for that to happen, in order for us to be able to meet in that space, we have to trust the social space, right? Because if it's so dangerous, if it's so volatile, we would just stay in our own little boxes and we'd be so afraid to relate to each other, right? There'd be no performance, there'd be no cultural information or cultural experience. And so through Hannah Arendt, through her teachings on Hannah Arendt, I understood this thing I mentioned before about forgiveness and promising. That there are some things that come from this space, which is a space we inherit, which is a space of society that says, we kind of accept that when we walk through that door, we won't murder each other. That's a given in the space. It's a premise for us to be able to be here. But that also provides a sort of a secret promise that also provides a possibility of going to an edge of almost. Right? And that little edge of almost violating the other is a very dramatic place. And maybe that edge gets pushed and gets pushed and gets pushed with every generation to a different position. And so I'm curious about how theater can question that edge.
When you use the term breakdown or these gaps or all these terms, do you mean that metaphorically or as an intellectual concept, or do you mean it very concrete, practical now, here?
That's a great question because it is very intellectual, right? It's actually a way of dealing with an experience that we jump into the analysis in a way. So I think...
So you use the intellectual analysis while you work?
No, I think it's a constant volleyball or sort of tennis match between reflection and experience. So it's a process. I mean, I think in a collaborative process, a devising process, we might give ourselves a task, right, in a theatrical process where we create an improvisation, let's say, with certain limitations. And we go into it fully accepting the limitations of that task. And sort of in a way we could say believing the limitations of the task, accepting them. But we need to move out and reflect on them and adjust and respond and maybe keep pushing, right? And I think part of that is we don't want to work in a way that is without a spectator. So we encourage at NTA people to work with observation, to watch each other, you know, in a devising process, so that it's not just about having an experience as a group together, but it's about sharing the experience and say, I saw this, what about this, and fighting for territory in the development of the expression. So maybe the meeting, right, that critical meeting is also what's at stake in the territory between me and you if we're making something together. And we see that a lot, actually, in our students, that they have to struggle for that territory. But something comes from that, which is self-knowledge and ways of articulating who I am in public space and being challenged as soon as I articulate it. I say, this is who I am today in this space, and then when we meet it actually on the floor, we find out we have to change that expression again and again.
Can we try to break this down to talk about to training somehow? And can we start with the simple but I think interesting question, which I asked a couple of the other ones as well. When you take in students, or when you want students for your study program, what are you looking for? What kind of skill or what kind of craft or thoughts or?
It has a couple of different layers. One of the first things is, I think it was William Espers yesterday who mentioned this partly this sort of this need, right, to be in social space, and maybe not overly articulated at the start. But at the same time, I think that we are looking for people who have an artistic vision. They maybe haven't found out how to say it yet, but they're curious about it. In fact, maybe what we experienced in the interview, and I can say because we just went through this at Easter time for the entrance exams, is this breakdown, if I can come back to that again, trying to describe what I want to do with the theater. And it's really this, I'm trying to tell you, and we have students, sometimes they get red in the face and they're saying, but no, it's this. And then we think, this is interesting. Maybe it's a little bit dangerous. And we start to think we can find a meeting there. But we're also looking technically for people who are willing to put their bodies in a situation where it can be pushed and pulled and have a flexibility of the voice and the musculature. So we can't really work with someone if they're coming in and they're not willing to take risks with their body. Right? So it's not about coming in and being able to present, let's say, a well-trained dancer's body or a well-trained singer's voice. Sometimes those people are exactly who we don't take. But that they have this willingness to try and to expand and take risks with the body, always in relation to the other. We find a lot of times that we have really interesting movers, let's say, who come and take up the floor and have a beautiful way of expressing themselves, but they have no idea what's happening in the room, who's there, who they're working with. And so that's precisely the combination in a way.
So it sounds almost like you want students that starts to question what theater is and what an actor is already when they start to study.
Or they're questioning it in themselves. Maybe they haven't taken it so far as to a social space in words, but they're questioning it in themselves. I'm here because I know you do something different, is often what we hear. And I want to find out what my way of doing this is. We often hear that, and I think that's actually really important. And then one of the first things we have to challenge them is to say, your way isn't only yours. You know, it's about what you find in the space. But that openness and that curiosity is very different than saying, I want to come in because I know that I have to have a BA in acting in order to work in the National Theater or in order to get a job at a film. You know, that they don't come in with the results in mind, but they come in with a question.
So it sounds like, okay, so you take in the students for the study program and you say that, okay, we're going to research what theater and actor is here. That's what we're going to do. So our study is kind of built up around that idea.
With some structures in place for the skills. Because the skills, I think I gave this.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, some of that. But still, it has to be a kind of definition. What is theater art? Somehow, I mean, you need an idea about what we are doing. Or what kind of art field we are working in to be able to put together a kind of
which is
structure.
Interdisciplinarity, curious about how other genres, how other fields can feed and be responsive in the theater. So for example, visual arts and scenography, because we have a dual program, right, which is about scenographers who are working with space and with visuality, and often with sound, right, and other media, light. But it's about creating a space, right, through these elements with actors who are actors as creators. So there's a curiosity about these other media. So many times the auditions, you know, that we experience for our program are not monologues, and that's actually very important. That they come in with an awareness of space and perhaps use of objects, right, or use of other elements. But that there's a curiosity about how these elements can work together. And maybe not a fully articulated vision yet, and certainly not a full awareness of the possibilities, but that vision of theater is beginning with space, absolutely. And that space isn't just physical or architectural, it's relational as well. And maybe they don't quite have this understanding yet, because some of that comes through the critical theory that we teach in the school.
Maybe we should also be concrete about exercises and the work and so on. I participated in your workshop yesterday, for instance, and that was very funny. And I had to, we all had to tell.
He was great.
Thank you. She's flirting.
Seduction, right?
Yeah. And then we were telling stories. I told a story about, no, it doesn't matter what it was about, but the point here is, then we had like something called, what you call gaps, like moments in my story where I like
did something that wasn't intentionally, but maybe something that showed my vulnerability, for instance, could be, or a gesture or something, which was then highlighted by the people that saw it, and I then, when I had to retell the story, I had to even show it more. This weak point. Yeah, emphasize.
And it was compositional, so it wasn't random.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, okay, there's a failure, that's cool, let's look at this, let's make
that to the performance. That's what I somehow felt.
In a way. I mean, I think there's a couple elements to the task which are very important, maybe that demonstrate some of the more theoretical stuff I've been chatting about. So you get up and tell a story, and I ask them first time to use the story, potentially, that you always tell. That could be the one you choose. And so if you think to yourself, what's the story I always tell? And it's part of like the scripts that you carry around with you. You know, you have these scripts of this is me, this is my funny joke, or whatever it might be. So a person gets up and tells a story. And with two partners, the two partners observe and reflect back through living documents what we call the cracks or the gaps in the story. And it's the moments which are determined partly by the spectators, right? What is a crack or a gap? So it's partly a personal aesthetic, but we're really looking at also how the actor decides, well, this isn't part of what's happening right now. For example, sometimes an actor will crack up, or sometimes we do, and things like this. I mean, we're familiar with these moments. And it's almost like there's an awareness in some actors that that's not part of what's going on between you and I, but actually what's happening is I have a story I need to download to you. And it doesn't really matter almost what space I'm in. It's like da-da-da-da-da, I gotta get the story out, I gotta get it to you, you need to know the information. And maybe I have a way of doing it that I've learned. I've been trained to say it in a certain way, so it's very compelling and very interesting and very well done. But it doesn't matter who I am or what the space is or what's happening. But what's really interesting is, of course, how these little moments express something about what's happening between you and I. So if I'm doing this a lot, there's really the space is affecting me. This is where the space inscribes itself onto me. The space between us, the space I'm in, the space of being watched. Right? So what happens then if say Leonard decides that's for him, that's the crack, and he does it. He gets up on the floor and goes 3 times and shows me what the action is and the quality, and it's all about breath and rhythm. Breath and rhythm. That's what we're looking at. So I take from a handful of these living documents and I emphasize them and retell the story. It changes the rhythm of my speech, and it brings me very much into the room, so that I'm becoming very aware, again, of more gaps that appear, but also the way in which my story is reflected back to me, that it's not just something that I carry around, but it's something that happens here. It also can be really funny, can be very touching, and it has a compositional purpose, which it creates a different rhythm from naturalism, right? And what's fascinating is that actually we find out, of course, that what's natural is long, very beautiful continuum of many different human expressions. So natural is debatable.
So this kind of strategy also makes us aware about something in the room or the theater or the performance, which we normally maybe not are used to look at or think about, but still it communicates something.
Because that's what's happening. Right, it's the difference between a frame that says this isn't happening, this is happening, right? Yeah. And a frame that says hey, this is all happening. This is all happening. I have a story I really want to tell, and the story is important, and I should communicate well. My voice should be heard, right? And my voice should still be privileged, right? I need to communicate, so it's not that I forget about my voice. But what happens with the obstacle of then having to actually stay with this awareness? And that's just one of many possible strategies of evoking presence inside a kind of breakdown. But there's also, I think there's knowledge in there, and that's why it comes back to this idea of research. It's not just an aesthetic style. We find something out. We find something out about how the space is working. We find something out about us as a group, about ourselves as actors. And that's the important thing. The important thing isn't that I'm sort of giving you a particular aesthetic in this exercise, but that you begin to do a kind of research about your way of dealing with this reflection from the other. Because it's compositional, right? Some people, you noticed in the workshop, really chose to go for the gaps in a rhythmic way that almost erased the story. And for some, they really held on to the story and kept it very precise, but they made a little kind of a hiccup for where the gaps could be emphasized. So you begin to find something about your own compositional way of relating through these frictions.
This probably makes the students very much aware about the theater as a form and what it is, and question it and so on, and go further with it. But what about the training of the actor as, you know, more like craft, like the craft which is like has a tradition and is used in the theater to perform character in the way that we see the characters already are performing in theater and so on. Are they? What about these crafts? Are they interesting, important, or?
Well, when you talk about a craft, then we have an assumption that there's in a manufacturing fabrique, that there's a right way to put something through a machinery to get it out on the other side that is marketable, efficient, and recognizably valuable. So I think craft is really important in a lot of areas. For example, I need to know how to connect electrical wiring in order to make the lights come on. That's a wonderful craft to know. And understanding the way that the vocal cords vibrate and understanding how the breath relates to the space of the body, that's craft in a skill sense. Because how you use it, right? How you use that physical space and how you understand that anatomy and evoke that in a space, it translates further from just the mechanics of the biology to a kind of artistry. Maybe that's a craft. But the way I relate to you, if that becomes a craft, if the way I relate to you through all of my behaviors and my placement in space, my artistic choices, if that becomes a craft, then I'm not here. You know, because somehow I've brought in to the space of meeting you a completely formed decision about how I should be. And it just, to me, that expresses an incredible amount of fear. It's actually quite afraid of what happens when I don't know what to do. And what's beautiful is to have well-developed skills so that you can be versatile and flexible and expressive and present, right? So that you have an active body and your senses are awake. But how you use those and what happens between us, the cultural knowledge that comes out of that, it's something I can't script.
But all this we have now talked about and around, all this nicely figured out methods, which is like clear pedagogical structure that we have worked out in the last 100 years. And
1500?
No, 50 till 100.
Okay.
Well, of course we can start with...
but actually, that's really important. What happened a little over 100 years ago? It's like the Industrial Revolution becomes, you know, even more a part of our everyday life. We have this industry and modernism and the clock, just ways of being in our day and ways of organizing our life according to efficiency, according to time, right? According to producing a self that can survive well and sort of recreate reality as it's given to us. So technique has become so overvalued as a way of accessing knowledge. And I think there are methods, and I think what's beautiful about what we do at NTA is that all of these pedagogues could come to NTA and all of our students would just surrender and experience these things in different moments and then leave the experience and continue to have a dialogue with their approach to the space, with their approach to each other, and with their approach to the theater, and the next teacher. So it's not a religion that says, we don't accept any of the material that's come before us, and we're just standing sort of in a void and reinventing the world. But it's a dialogue. We can steal from you. And we will.
But a strategy, pedagogical strategy or method
that is built around this research and so on. Isn't it still as it's still a strategy because you have a clear
Yeah,
idea what you want.
Yeah,
somehow.
of course. I mean,
But
it's not
isn't
chaos. Yeah.
No, but is there a danger that it get too like random?
No, it's not random because we are the curators of the curriculum, which is like in a lot of programs and theaters here in Norway, it rotates every 4 years. We come in as people with a vision, with an artistic vision, which we've articulated, and we have networks and relationships to peoples who are peoples, you can tell it's been a long week, to people who are expressive in many different disciplines in the field. And we bring those people in and curate them like you would curate this festival. Right? So you've got many different influences. And I think it was Gianluca this morning who said what's beautiful about the festival is that people can take away from it their own opinions and that they can make it their own and learn about acting through that process. And that's exactly the point.
Eclectic strategy.
Is it eclectic? But isn't that how it is to be a person in the world? Is that you
We are eclectic.
Well, maybe, but eclectic is, it gives it a, it's like, well, it's this you are different, you know, it's, eclectic is, maybe it's eclectic in pedagogical context, if we look at some institutions that we're relating to. But I don't think that it's an eclectic experience for a human being to have to go into different situations and take what's given and find strategies in the moment that you then abandon in the next moment because, okay, this doesn't work here.
I'm just thinking also, I just want to mention here, because maybe also many teachers that says they work in this method, maybe also do more of this question what I'm doing work in their method as well.
Of course
I think it's important to mention.
Yeah, and
because if not, we create a maybe false dichotomy here.
I agree with you. And again, if I return back to this appreciation for what is given to us by elders, I think we wouldn't be able to stand in a position of questioning if we hadn't inherited structures that have sort of laid themselves on the table so clearly. And so partly what's so beautiful about many of the techniques is that we can see how they work, we can see what they are. They're very open and sharing about what they do. And so we can work within that and say, let's question this is interesting. We can have a dialogue with that. So it's not that we're out of relation to the field, but that our relationship to the field is one of curiosity and research.
But Karmenlara,
And critique.
how do you question your questioning?
How do you question your questioning?
Yeah.
How can you not? Because you're not living in this sort of like you're not constantly being reaffirmed. I mean, we as directors of the school, we are questioning our approach all the time when our students come to us and say, but this isn't working for me. What do I do? And then we have to have a dialogue with the student. And we have to give a lot of time. And something about that produces an understanding of what we do, or an appreciation for what we do, that it's an ethical relationship to the student. So in fact, the moments we have when we're not questioning what we do, feel like maybe that's a temporary vacation. You know, and I mean, for example, I've learned so much from the teachers this week and have had the feeling of awe of like, I want to be in that workshop and I want to learn something there. You know, so of course, just by having that response, I can say, oh, so how does that challenge what I'm doing? You know, maybe I can use repetition more in my teaching. Maybe I need to think more about this or that. You know, I mean, it's more responsive. I'm not coming in with an output of a certain type of actor that I would like to make, except that I would like that person to be one who's questioned.
But to pick up that topic, I have already claimed that every pedagogical strategy somehow is followed by an ideology or some kind of form of aesthetics or way of thinking about aesthetics. If you buy that argument, what kind of theater do you promote with this way of working and thinking? What kind of aesthetics is this? What is the end result? Somehow?
I don't know. What is the end result? It's different with every single student group. It's different with every director we invite. I think that we can talk about the things that it shares, the qualities that the different productions and pieces share.
But what kind of quality of are the students having? which have gone through this.
Are you asking me to essentialize and make and put all of them into one particular type of expression? Because I would say that they definitely start with space. It's very spatial. Mm-hmm. We can all agree on that. And that there's a concern for musicality and rhythm and speech, right? That there's a concern for that as a mode of relating. And actually, we have one colleague now, Camilla Tverbach, who had my position before me, who's really researching the use of text and musicality and rhythm as an approach to actor training. So they have this quality that they're exploring how rhythm can be a place of relation. But I wouldn't say that, okay, well, we always make theater that's, let's say, about gender, or we always make theater that's using audience participation. Or, I mean, if I were to go into that direction, in a way, I think that it would be beside my argument. But I will say it begins very much with space, and it's collaborative. Right? So even when we work with a director, it's a nice little fight, right? The directors, because there's a kind of collaboration that's happening based on the methodologies that they've been working with. But of course the director has a concrete vision, so it's a dialogue, and the students have to learn, how do I bring my vision to a dialogue with a director? What is a director? Right? And we're kind of asking that question again and again with this every class that works with the director. And the director brings us a different vision of what that should be.
I realized through the debates here that most of these pedagogues, when they are asked what kind of theater can your students do, oh, they can do everything. It's always like this. Can your students do everything as well?
Yeah, I was going to say this. My pause is that, can you do everything? I mean, I can't spin a pizza dough like this because I haven't practiced that, for example. But if I decide I need to do that, I'll go study it and find out. So what our students can do is research. They can research, not just like this. Many of them don't bother with that at all. But they can research, they can study the forms that they need to in order to work, and they can find the right people. Because we've given them, through their education, we've given them access to a variety of different types of arts and critical dialogues that they can access and call upon to find out, but how do I do this? Okay, I want to use audience participation. Most of the time it fails. I don't want to do that again. Who's doing that well? What can I learn from it? Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to hear from the audience what
Me
they think.
too.
We should be relational here, I think.
My question is about, you're talking much about that a performer or actor will learn something about her or himself. Is that the same important as the audience learn it? Like, is it the danger that the stage is so important that we on the stage learn something and the audience is coming in the other? That's number two.
Oh wait, I'm trying to understand your question. So that if the
Is actors more important than the audience?
No, absolutely not, because they can't happen. I mean, if we begin with spatial approach, then we actually have to begin with where, who, what is our audience, and how are they relating to what we're doing. Because we're not starting with the actor and what the actor is feeling or what the actor would like to express, but the actor as creator, beginning with the space. So the first question will be sort of, why should our audience be here, or how should they be here with us? So if it's a site-specific piece, it's very much a practical thing that begins with, how do we invite them into this space? How do we invite them to share in what's going on, or create the space with us? Right, and they have to test that out. We really encourage them to test that out, to find out how they need to adjust what they're doing, to research what they'd like to find out. I mean, sometimes it fails, and then they have to say, okay, we didn't test it enough. Maybe we didn't this time think about the audience enough. We were being too conceptual, and they have to go back to the floor, back to the space with each other and bring in their friends and see what happens if they try it in a different way. But if I understand some of what you're getting at, it's this question of, does the research become more important than the...
Yeah. Or are we doing it for ourselves? That's my concern.
To overdo it.
Are we doing it for ourselves? or not for the audience?
You know, that's a good question for every artist, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question for every
because
artist.
Because you speak so much about identity and not about society, so it's like...
Am I speaking a lot about identity?
No, maybe not. I always have that feeling that we learn about ourselves and our own identity more than the society, but that's maybe wrong.
I think it's a constant tension, because no one of us is unconcerned with ourselves. I mean, we're not, it's impossible, because we're constantly being thrown into a kind of, maybe a little bit of a crisis. Like, this is a crisis. You know, I don't mean it in a sort of so negative way, but it's a friction. You know, I'm here, you can't all speak equally and reply to what I'm saying. I own language for this moment, you know, because I have this mic and I've been given this position. So we're set up in a way, we've been set up in an unequal tension. So that situation demands that I listen to you. That's an ethics, and our school definitely, I would say, works with an ethics of begin with relating, begin with thinking about your audience, not just as a kind of, oh, they're there for me so I can be the actor, but they're there as collaborators in some way. Yeah.
Camilla had a question. Or a comment, we'll see.
Yeah, I'd like to. Sorry, I'd like to comment that question and also something about the aesthetics. I think knowing the Norwegian context, where that question is coming from, is this worry that we all have that theatre work becomes therapeutic, and I think in this, what Karmenlara is speaking about is exactly the opposite in a sense, because she's so much emphasizing the relational space that it means that you can only find out things about yourself and your process in relation to the audience. That's where it happens. So you cannot close yourself off in your own space. And I think it's also a difference about how we understand subjectivity.
Find out something about yourself. You said that find out something about yourself in the meeting with the audience, and then we end up with yourself again.
No, I mean self, then we can discuss what we mean by self, but the self is created only in relation to someone else, and in this case the audience, obviously, because we're on stage. So there is no self, you could say, when you're alone, if you want to.
And I think it's about the demand, you know, and this is something that I know also you're researching, that it's about the ethical demand, you know, that you're facing me is a demand from that I meet you. So that situation which precedes any expression that I make is how I have to respond to the theater situation. You're facing me, so how do I deal with that? How do I challenge that? Right? My questions or my aesthetics come from that situation.
Can I just comment on another thing?
Briefly.
Okay.
We have many.
Yeah, it's this thing about the aesthetics. I would just like to mention that I think the work at the Norwegian Theatre Academy has an aesthetic tradition, if you like, that comes from the avant-garde theatre.
Yeah,
let's say around the late 1800s, that's been developing throughout today. Performance art, all that work is informing the work.
It does inform it, and I resisted going there only because I'm also curious about, I mean, yes, the avant-garde has influenced so much of my own history and the history of the Academy, but I'm also curious about when we move away even from terms like postmodern, avant-garde, classical, etc. I'm really curious at what the generation now will tell us their theater is, without necessarily having, they need to know the history, but without having to repeat the aesthetics of what would be considered maybe now 50 to 60-year-old ways of experiencing the world. So it's really important what Camilla says, that it's somehow rooted at its onset in the traditions of the avant-garde, but it doesn't have a kind of religious allegiance to the avant-garde, like perhaps maybe an art school that's very much about reproducing that aesthetic.
Yeah, and I think also
for me though, relational aesthetics, this term and this way of thinking is a way of trying to break out of the idea of something is modern, postmodern, avant-garde, it develops and so on, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't develop. Maybe we're just in a dialogue. That's also a perspective we have to remember. Michael, you had your hand up? No? Yes? No? Okay. So then it's Hans. I know. I am writing you down. All of you. Just lift your hand.
Okay, it's maybe a provocative
Great.
question. If I say that I have the feeling of you being a little bit missionary, as a missionary, which is very often the feeling of very many teachers
for different traditions, very much the tradition of Stanislavski. Isn't that a paradox to the questioning?
Yes, and you're right.
And can you talk about that? What is your mission? No, that I feel the contradiction here of questioning and mission.
I'm sure, yeah, but I'm not really concerned that I make perfect sense in terms of making you feel comfortable.
Okay, no, is that the position of being in opposition?
It could be. It could be who I am with you right now. It could be who I am in the context of this festival, and I think that's a big part of it. Because, for example, I've placed this dialogue within what I'm calling the workshop, within this festival, in dialogue and in opposition. So that's who I am here, in a way. But there is a missionary tone. There is a missionary tone. I really love what I do.
I do.
Yeah, but it's not a missionary tone that says like you should all be like me. It's just this. It's a desire that informs a lot of my curiosity. Yeah, and I'm really excited that that we're so different and that we're approaching this so differently. I mean, I'm finding it really interesting, but I'm not gonna accept it. I'm not gonna accept it and say, okay, you're there, you're different, I'm over here. I'm gonna keep meeting it, you know. Yeah.
I will kindly ask you people to not go into long conversations with Karmenlara because we have a lot of hands up here now. Next is Janne.
Hi, thank you. You said your students and what you teach, it's all about questioning first. Don't go in and say, questioning. But often when I go into a situation, I decide on beforehand how I'm going to perform, in what meeting, who I'm meeting, what I want to,
Of course.
And
we're trying to do that.
Yeah, because I feel maybe also there, the biggest failures are.
That's true. Yeah, because
So-
it's inevitable.
Yes, but you are saying maybe if you don't go in with a question, you will not be here fully?
The question isn't always, I think, like a literal, obvious research question, right? But if the training creates a kind of space of questioning because it doesn't give one philosophy that you can rest in, you are volatile. You go into a space going, what happens here? What is this space? Even if you go in thinking, okay, today I'm gonna be the one who says yes to everything. Like that's what I'm gonna be. I'm gonna perform as the guy who says yes to everything. And you're still meeting the challenge of the space of the unexpected. Or you could say, I know that I'm not gonna like this. This is gonna be something I really don't enjoy, and I'm not gonna go into it. Or I've done this before, I know this. I mean, we deal with this, right? You can never, in a way, you can never become a blank slate. Right, and you learn strategies of relating from childhood. So it's not about erasing them, but it's about questioning them and challenging them through a volatile encounter, right? And a volatile encounter with training.
Could you send a mic there?
Hi, I'd just like to hear a bit about your stance on training, really. And I mean that in the terms of what is the ideal time for training? Because obviously you've been given a role in an institution that has a set time, you have set class hours, and you you have the desire to introduce or open up possibilities of so many different types of theatre, performance and art. What would be the ideal time?
Are you talking about age? Or you mean time of day?
I mean length of course, length of program.
Because we have a 3-year program.
Right. Because we've been hearing from America, from Europe and Russia.
Yeah.
We've got between a 2-year and 5-year program to make professionals, to give a sense of completion. But do you feel it should be more a way of giving a foundation where the training stops?
Yeah, I would say it's a foundation. It's a foundation, and in many respects it's a vocabulary, different spaces of thinking, right, or questioning. So I don't think 3 years is too much or too little. And my experience in my previous job, which was at Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, is a 4-year program. And many people left after 3 because they found ways to complete the training in the summers and graduate early. And it was starting to become a movement, actually, in the school that 3 years felt like, yeah, now I can go off and do what I want to do. If I go further, it's a different kind of mastery. I think master's education is really important for artists who really want to go deeper in their research and deeper in their articulation. And it also is about a kind of maturity of level of what you bring to the field, right? So that you don't go in maybe sort of exploring things so much with such a range, right? But that you start to say, I'm really interested in gender, and I really want to see how far I can take this issue in the stage, for example. So I do think that there's a need for further training after 3 years for some artists, who really want to go further with that depth. But 3 years, in my experience, is enough for a foundation. Yeah.
Could you give the mic to the two of you had that comment?
I was very excited to hear the idea of questioning the natural. And coming from the world of cinema, I think it's a great urgency to question cinematic construction, narratives, and character. And I'm just thinking about the idea of the gap and the connection between that and questioning the natural. I don't know if you can say a little bit more about it as a way or a method.
I think that first of all, the idea of the gap is something that comes from literary criticism. For those of you who are scholars, you maybe recognize that. But and there's some theory of dramaturgy that has developed in the theater that actually audiences create theater through the gaps. And that the experience of theater is not in the narrative or in the concrete material, the representational material that I give you, but in what you do with what's missing, or what you perceive to be sort of, this space that's in between. So when it comes to, if I understand what you're calling naturalism or realism, and of course those are traditions, but do you mean the natural as in just what we...
The natural, as in what we take.
But I think that's exactly what an approach to this task, for example, that Øystein participated in is questioning. Right? If we were to have more time to go further with that exercise, we begin to ask ourselves, like, well, what actually is natural behavior? Because in theater, we sort of frame what we privilege. We frame the technically accepted behavior. And that's why I say it's very much related to industry. And that if we want to get into political issues, it's how to be a good and right woman, how to be a certain kind of man. Even in the complexities of postmodern life, it's still there. So by playing with the gaps, we in a way, we question how we framed reality.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Just a quick, so it's almost like a... I'm sorry, we can't go into conversations. We have overtime already, so please, from now on, just make a very brief question. Did you want to make a comment to what they're saying, or do you want to say something about the structure? If you want to have a question or a comment, I put you in here. It's getting hot in here.
if it's a comment, then you do that. If you do this, if you want comments, you do this. I am the boss of the world here.
Hey, boss of the world.
Do this. Okay, you have a comment.
This is really happening.
My comment is that
we talked about naturalism and realism. There are two different things.
They're very different.
Naturalism, it's a genre in which story responds to cause-effect. Yeah. Realism, it's something which is close to what we perceive as reality.
Yeah, which is why I asked her if she was talking about... That's why I was asking her if she was talking about genre or about the idea of natural. So thank you.
Please send the mic back. We have another question there. Oh, there is a mic there already.
I have a question about the actor, I guess, it is the Actors Festival. Because I understand you more in the way that you educate creators. Is that right? And if so, how do you prepare students to meet directors and work sort of with or under directors?
A lot to your question. I mean, I would say that we look at the actor as creator, and that's partly because if we begin with an ethical space or the space of relation, then actors are connected with action. The idea of actor is connected with action. But to make it short, in terms of directors, we put our students in projects and collaborations with directors several times throughout their education. And so it's experiential training. They learn based on having to work with different directors with very different approaches and different visions. And this isn't just the acting program, but the scenography as well. And they have to work together to realize the project. What's great, I think, about, from my experience this year and also knowing the school before, is that what happens is a kind of flexibility, that the actors enter the space with that three-dimensional awareness, or four-even-dimensional awareness, we could say, of what the what the director's vision might be over time, rather than, oh, this is the kind of actor I am, how can I fit that in?
Does that mean that you're also questioning the structure of, or the hierarchy of?
It gets questioned, even if we haven't made it the point. You know, it gets questioned. We do question it through the dialogues that we have throughout the education. And with one particular class, it might come into question very viscerally, very quickly, and then it becomes a dialogue in a very visceral way. You know, what is a director? How does that work for us in this process?
Hans, could you send your mic to the lady in red? Can you send the mic to Hans?
Hi. First of all, thank you. Really interesting. I went to see the final project at the National Theatre with the students, and I really saw this research and questioning of forms and relation to each other and the audience. But my question is, do you also see your students and the projects questioning the stories you tell? Because this particular performance was based on a script, 100 years old script about men violating women, and I really felt like this was not questioning. So my concern is, are you questioning, you know, the relation to the audience, to each other as performance forms, games of forms, but not questioning the output of the stories?
No, of course we question it, but I'm glad you bring up this production because it is really an intense dynamic. First of all, there's a couple of things. One is that she based, the director who's Victoria Meidek, she based her work off of this, as you say, these series of illegal, what were once outlawed scenes from Arthur Schnitzel. And her particular dramaturgy, of course, is unique to her vision, and every director brings a different one. So we're challenged by that, and we have to dialogue around that as the work is made, right, and how we relate to that particular vision. So part of it is unique to each director. But of course, we challenge the stories. I mean, I think that's by challenging the form and challenging the space of relation, the story is put at stake all the time. And part of what's going on in that dramaturgy is, in some respects, is an overstimulation of this violation, I mean, and I think we've even, those of us who are related to the production through NTA, we've had a lot of dialogues about how we feel and how we respond, you know, where it works, where it fails, and it's different for everybody. So there are times when we gather around a project that raises a lot of questions. It isn't perfect in terms of a particular vision of ethics, but what it creates is a strong conversation. And we have the conversation, even within the process with the students. And that production brought up a lot of intense challenges for the students because of some of the issues. So part of what comes out of that is a confrontation with a very hard surface, a historical issue, and the dialogue that emerges from it is partly the learning process.
We can critique that.
So for it is most important what we tell or how we tell it.
What we tell. I don't think they can be separated.
Michael, do you stretch your arm or do you want to say something?
Ja, nein, ich habe mich gemeldet. Das liegt bestimmt viel an der Übersetzung. Ich habe nicht alles verstanden. Ich finde die große Herausforderung, die wir haben als Lehrer.
So he didn't understand everything, but he thinks because of the translation, not what you said.
I can't understand what you just said.
I just say he didn't understand everything, but not because of what you said, because of his getting translation from what he wants to say is the main responsibility he thinks is for a teacher.
Die jungen Leute, die da zu uns kommen und die ja auch auf der Suche sind, danach, wie man leben soll und wie man arbeiten soll und was mit diesem Beruf. Was man mit diesem Beruf soll, in zu kleine Fragen zu verwickeln. Das ist ja die Gefahr, die wir immer haben.
Ja. The danger is if you work with these young people that are coming to the school, to involve them in too detailed questions, too small questions.
Und ich habe so ein bisschen den Eindruck, dass es bei euch viel darum geht, also ich habe heute viel gehört über Fragen, aber das ist ein bisschen die Frage, die auch die Studentin eben gestellt hat. Mir ist das Ziel noch nicht klar.
So what you said was a lot about questions and questions and questions, but what she said maybe, what is the aim, yeah, or the target, yeah?
Das Fragen stellen allein ist ja vielleicht noch keine Methode, ne, sondern nur ein Teil davon.
Because it says maybe questioning is it's not a method, it's maybe a part of it, but yeah.
It's a question of method.
Is it a question or is it a comment? I mean, I think it's important also. I mean, we talk here in this space now for 1 hour a lot about the questioning aspect, but it's not that we go into a room and only say, oh, what should we do? I mean, we're putting them from month to month or week to week in encounter with very strong artists with very complex visions of their own. So what comes out of each situation are sets of questions from each kind of process. So it could be a workshop in voice, it could be a workshop in choreography, it could be a workshop in composition or performance art. And the artists and teachers that are coming in have a lot of experience exploring questions in their form, in their field, which they bring very concretely into the space, and the students dialogue with and make responses from. There's reflection and evaluation. So what happens is a collection after this 3-year process, a kind of collection of questions of maybe personal politics, responses, and some self-knowledge. And I think because we have the vision of artist as creator, or actor as creator, that's the intended outcome. Was this what you asked? What's the result or the aim? Is actor as creator?
Okay, I'm gonna give space for 2 more small questions, but you both already had the word, so I will kindly ask you to make it short. Hans?
Very short. If I said that you can't learn acting the same way as you learn turning a pizza as a craft, that it is a long journey and it's quite hard and it's complicated, very complex. It's like being a concert pianist. You can't do it just to understand it and then, well, I pick something and learn something out of it. It takes time. What do you think about that? Is this not compatible to what, or is this sort of long process of becoming a professional actor not compatible to what you are doing?
Two things. One is that I think the statement "you can't," is also about hierarchies. It's about a system that says you can't enter without. Just let me finish for a minute. I'm going to be provocative in response.
I just can't play Rachmaninoff in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but I don't need to play Rachmaninoff to express my experience of the world. If I want to play Rachmaninoff, if that's what I want to do, then I have to look at and research what's required to do it. And I might find out that I have to do it a different way than the man who spent his whole life playing only Rachmaninoff. Right? But so it's also about the question of what is it that I want to do with an audience, right? So I'm working from that space. But I do take issue with this is maybe where I get the most provoked, is this "you can't." And I use this model of this thing of the pizza, saying that it's a collection. You know, the actor is one who's who's doing actions in relational space. And I might decide that after a certain production, I might trash a bunch of skills that I don't find relevant anymore in this moment. But I think the freedom and the radicality and the courage to be able to do that, it goes against a certain system of reproduction, which says that I should get better at a certain manufacturing of a certain kind of theater the more I do it in order to make the same representation again and again and again.
Okay. Janne? Hans, would you please give Janne the mic?
Which isn't to say that a person doesn't have to practice articulating an artistic vision, right? Which is about it's about the collection. It's about what is my collection and how do I express it.
Janne?
Short.
Okay, from what I hear now, I'm kind of exhausted, and I'm thinking this school and education is really exhausting because of all the questioning all the time. And it's good because I like it, but still, I'm now in a workshop with Leonard, and all we are allowed to say is like, yes, we can, like all Obama going election. And it feels great.
It's beautiful.
Yes.
A lot of great material.
Are the students exhausted? Sometimes are they questioning just to question?
Of course. Are they questioning just to question?
Yeah, is it because you are always
they're not theoreticians and they're not philosophers, although they can be when they want to be. So they're not questioning just to question. But you know, I would love to have Leonard for a few weeks to offer some of what he knows for our students, and they can find out something about other ways of working to add to their experience. But I think our actors aren't only interested in finding what feels good all the time. And I think it's important that we make space for all of those possibilities. So it's not about a kind of masochistic or sadomasochistic approach, right? We're not trying. Yeah, we're not trying to sort of give them an experience of burnout. But many of them are there because they're pressed. They have the ethical demand of making a kind of expression in public space, which is not easy to make.
It's so great that you want to continue to go on and discussing. I think you should do that in your life and wherever, but not here, because we really need to have a break, okay?
Thank you.
So now 7 minutes short break. Thank you, Karmenlara.